Contamination in Timberborn is a game mechanic which you often have to deal with, regardless of which map you're playing. While at the surface level it works similar to how irrigation works, it still has its own bells and whistles and various gimmicks which you need to understand if you wish to master Timberborn. Currently, in the vanilla game, there is basically no use for contamination. This might of course change with updates and new factions added to the game, hopefully. And eventually, if no one else does it, I guess I'll just work on some mods to make contamination more useful. But first, let's discuss what actually causes it. So contamination is caused by bad water touching a dirt block, pretty similar to how irrigation happens when you have good water in a place. But while the irrigation distance depends on how wide the water body is, there is no such limitation on contamination, which always spreads the same distance regardless of the depth or width of the contaminating river. But this of course seems incorrect if you look at these examples. So what's happening? Let's just say we have a source of bad water. As you can see, contamination spreads 7 tiles from the river over here. But what happens if I widen the river on either side by 1 tile? Well, let's just cause some explosions then. The actual spread of the contamination does increase by 1 tile on either side, but relative to the river's edge, it's still only 7 tiles. This is really different from how irrigation works, where any increase will dramatically increase the range as well. And while the river's height doesn't actually affect how far the contamination spreads, what does affect it is how low the water inside the river is, relative to the terrain that you're trying to save. For example, by just dynamiting your rivers a little bit and making sure that the bad water is at a lower level, you can save all your farms from contamination permanently. This is probably something I should have done in my Nomads playthrough. But hey, we'll keep it in our back pocket for when we eventually do the hard mode, okay? Now let's talk about what contamination actually does. For the most part, contamination will be killing all of your plants. There is also another kind of contamination that happens to beavers, which we're gonna talk about in just a couple minutes over here. But generally speaking, if you have a plant on contaminated ground, it's as good as dead. Because plants are gonna die incredibly fast if they're on contaminated ground. Let's take a look at the oak trees, for example. Without water, they can survive for a really long time, over 15 days over here. However, as soon as they're on contaminated ground, even with water, they're pretty much as good as dead, 0.3 days. And if we just keep the game running over here, you'll quickly find out that you are going to be losing all of your trees. Crops work in a similar fashion, where any crop on contaminated ground is as good as dead. So it's pretty important for you to make sure that contaminated water does not get anywhere close to your farms. So let's quickly go through every single method that you can use to avoid this from happening. The official method to block contamination is by using a contamination barrier if you're playing the folktales. The Iron Teeth have their own version which also blocks irrigation. All you need to do to protect your farms is simply create a barrier which will stop the contamination from spreading outward. But as you can see, contamination will still spread 7 blocks out from any exposed tile. For example, let us just build this over here, and you'll quickly see that there is virtually no effect on the contamination. Just in case you think it's the top one causing this, we've just blocked that out as well, and there's still plenty of contamination over here, which is all being caused by this single block. By closing that hole, yeah, we can remove the spread. Let's give it another shot over here. Take a look at what happens when I remove a single block. Contamination spreads outward in a circle with a radius of 7 from that single block. And even if you create another block in its path, contamination spread does not actually stop. Because, well, just look at the visuals over here. It can still go between the corners, you know? However, you can still control the contamination if you just close it off. But these barriers need metal in order to make, which might not be available to you in the early game. On a similar note though, explosives are also not available to you in the early game, so you can't really dig your trenches deeper to avoid the contamination that way. So is there something we can do over here to protect our farmland, or are we out of options? Well, as we already know, contamination spreads from dirt blocks over here. So this contaminated river touching this individual dirt block over here is causing the contamination. So what happens if we can disrupt that connection? By placing levees, of course. There is some contamination that receded from back here, Let's just continue this exercise and see what happens. Slowly but surely, as soon as this over here is 7 blocks wide, yeah, the center line over here is free from contamination. So by making sure that our farm is at least 7 tiles away from the closest contaminated tile that we can block, you can get back a lot of farming area. Well, in this case, we pretty much got back the entire river. And eventually, when you do get access to metals, you can place contamination barriers again and reclaim your entire farmland. So let's quickly sum this up before we move on. You can use levees to disrupt the connection between the bad water and the soil. You can use contamination barriers to do the same thing. However, this time you have to pay by losing a row of your farming area, which might not be preferred by everyone. Or you can just make the bad water river go deeper, and we'll talk about why this works right now. So by default, the contamination is going 7 tiles deep over here. However, if we just raise the levels over here, yeah, it's only going 2 tiles deep now. And by adding just one more layer over here, the contamination is no longer able to spread upstairs over here. Unfortunately though, this doesn't work the other way around, and contamination can still spread downward the full 7 tiles, similar to how irrigation works. So by making the river a single tile deeper, you should be able to get rid of most of the contamination effects. However, contamination still needs to pass a threshold in order to become effective. The actual numbers require a 50% contamination ratio in order for water to start contaminating the soil around it. Anything below 50% and all the contamination will recede. This is why it takes roughly 5 days for seeps during a bad tide to start spreading some contamination around them. Because until then, there's plenty of water in the reservoir to stop the contamination. But do keep in mind though, because even though there's no contamination being spread over here, yeah, the irrigation was significantly lower than what it could have been. So how does the beaver contamination work? Well, we're gonna have to sacrifice some beavers. Currently, this contamination sensor is set to detect a threshold over 5%. This is the default setting for contamination sensors when you first place them, and for good reason, because this is the number where water becomes dangerous. So, if for some ungodly reason we send one of these beavers over here through this water right now, yeah, things are gonna go really badly for them. It would seem like my beavers are actually immune to this. Usually in my playthroughs they get sick instantly. They're not getting sick over here. What's wrong? I gaslighted myself into thinking I have a mod that disables sickness. I have never even heard of such a mod. We had to wait for quite a few days for them to start getting sick, and I even had to increase their commute over here. Roughly, the chance starts at 5%, and then it only goes up. We had to actually increase it all the way up to 100% to become relevant. The way it works is that there's a small chance that they get sick while they're submerged. You might get completely unlucky and get your beavers sick instantly, or you might get even more unlucky like me and have to play for a week for it to happen. Once a beaver is sick, you will still get a few days where they can work around the colony and, help you build stuff. But it will say that this beaver has spent too much time in contaminated water. It's fine for now, but will get sick in a few days. And once they're sick, they're not going to be working on anything. So let's just fast forward until they get sick. Once a beaver is contaminated, they're going to become red. They're gonna look really bad, and they're gonna stop helping around the colony because, well, yeah, I don't think you want their help at this point. So let's fix them up. For the folktales, you're going to need an herbalist. And this person over here is gonna turn paper, dandelions, and berries into antidotes. This is a really weird combination of items that you need, and I really hope they create more uses for dandelions as well. But yeah, the herbalist is gonna use all of those items to make antidotes. And then the sick beavers are just gonna go and drink all that antidote and fix themselves up. You're going to need a lot of antidote, by the way. Technically 8, but around 10 is the number that you should expect. If I'm being honest, then the folktales pretty much got screwed over here as well, because they need to produce some otherwise useless stuff in order to cure their beavers, while the iron teeth can just take a bath in acid in order to cure themselves. Yeah, because all that the iron teeth need is this stuff, a decontamination pod, which uses just 50 horsepower and extract in order to cure beavers. The beavers come over here and just sleep inside of this. Easy peasy. I would like to petition that dandelions be added as a fun item like the sunflower seeds. That would improve things a lot. Because, you don't want to go out of your way just for an herbalist. That's just annoying. I guess what's more annoying is sending your beavers to get contaminated Yeah, let's get rid of this staircase now. I'll just talk about what you can do to make this better for your beavers, and that is by creating a gate over here and then automating that gate based on a contamination sensor which detects if the threshold is above 5%. Sorry, wait, less than 5%. You can even turn this green over here. So now, when it's safe to cross, the gate will open. Easy peasy. If you enjoyed this video, then you're definitely gonna enjoy my other content, okay? The main playthrough right now is Ember Pelts on the Nomads map, which is brand new. Link is gonna be on the screen right now, along with my Patreon, which will hopefully keep this channel alive. Thank you for watching, and bye!